Our sermon is based off Luke 23, verses 26 through 34. As they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, rather weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. There's a route in Jerusalem that's popular with Christian pilgrims. This route is known as the Via Dolorosa, otherwise known in English as the Way of Suffering. It's approximately 600 meters in length, and on this route there are 14 stations. These 14 stations represent 14 different events that occurred when Jesus was led from Pilate's palace to Golgotha. Pilgrims will stop at these 14 stations in order to better meditate on Jesus' passion. However, you don't need to travel all the way over to Jerusalem to walk on one of these Stations of the Cross trails. There are several of them scattered across the United States. One of these trails that I myself have fond memories of is at the Holy Hill Basilica in Hubertus, Wisconsin. This trail winds through the scenic forest in the Kettle Moraine Valley, and on this trail there are 14 life-size statues representing the 14 stations of the cross. While walking on this trail and marveling at the statues, one can't help but feel sympathetic towards Jesus. These statues remind us of the pain and the anguish and the suffering that he endured when he was on the real Via Dolorosa. And much like all of us feel sympathy when we focus on the passion, likewise people were feeling sympathetic for Jesus when he was on that real route. However, our sympathy towards Jesus pales in comparison towards his greater sympathy that he had for us. His sympathy led him to act. His sympathy led him to endure the pain and the suffering of the cross on our behalf. Pilate looked over at the angry mob, shouting, "Crucify," and then he looked over at Jesus. He couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He knew Jesus was innocent. He had examined the situation. He knew Jesus didn't deserve to die. He also knew Jesus didn't deserve to be flogged either, but he was hoping that that would satisfy the bloodlust of the angry mob. Unfortunately, it didn't. The mob still wanted him dead, and Pilate gave in. He handed Jesus over to them. He was sympathetic, but not sympathetic enough to do the right thing. When it came between saving some random Jew's life and his own job security was the greater priority. Pilate didn't know who Jesus really was. He didn't realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing him. Now, you wouldn't think of the soldiers as those who were very sympathetic towards Jesus. After all, they seemed to find sadistic enjoyment in torturing Jesus beforehand. They put the heavy cross on Jesus' shoulders, and he began his painful trek to Calvary. The soldiers knew what they did to Jesus. They were probably shocked he was even still alive. Not everybody survived the flogging. And now, Jesus had this heavy cross on his shoulders, covered in blood and in scars. He looked like a man who ought to be pitied. And in his physical condition, There was no way he was able to carry that heavy cross all the way up that hill. Even the soldiers realized that. And even their cold hearts felt some shred of sympathy for Jesus. They knew that in his physical condition, he wasn't going to be able to carry that cross all the way. Maybe even they started to realize that he didn't deserve to be treated in the way he was treated as well. Not that that was going to change anything. They had orders to follow, and one more dead Jew wasn't going to cause them to lose any sleep. They sympathetically took the cross off of Jesus' shoulders. Yet they didn't realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing them. They found Simon, a man from Cyrene, a Jewish pilgrim from North Africa, traveling on his way. They grabbed him and conscripted him to carry the cross for Jesus. Simon didn't volunteer for that. He would have rather have been with his family, celebrating the Passover, just like everybody else. And now here he was, carrying the cross of a condemned man. However, upon looking at Jesus, Simon must have felt some sympathy towards him. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know why he was condemned to death. But he certainly didn't deserve to be treated in the way that he was. Simon sympathetically took the cross on his shoulders and brought it all the way to Calvary. Yet he didn't realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing him. A large crowd of people were following Jesus, and this crowd consisted of a whole diverse range of people, perhaps followers of Jesus, random citizens, and maybe even those who got caught up in the mob mentality and shouted for his death. Now they were watching Jesus on his painful trek to Golgotha. What were they thinking? Maybe those who cried out for his death started having second thoughts. Maybe those who knew what Jesus had preached or had heard him thought it was unjust. Nevertheless, they didn't really understand why Jesus was doing what he was doing. They were sympathetic, yet they didn't realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing them. Among the crowd, there were women who were weeping and wailing. And much like the crowd, perhaps this group of women consisted of those who knew Jesus and those who were just brought to tears at the mere sight of him in his condition. This time, Jesus did something different. He stopped, he turned around, and he addressed them. Don't weep for me, rather weep for yourselves and for your children. Jesus foretold an event that sounded more like a nightmare. An event so bad that it would be preferable to be childless and barren. An event so bad that people would want mountains and hills to fall on them, to cover them. Jesus was sympathetic towards the suffering that they would endure when the Romans would besiege Jerusalem not too far off in the distant future. Then Jesus continued his trek to Calvary. The women were probably confused, but still sympathetic. Yet they didn't realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing them. Now we get to us. How do we feel when we see Jesus going through this? We know he doesn't deserve it. The scriptures make it very clear that this was painful, that this was not an easy thing. We can't help but feel sympathetic towards Jesus. Maybe even we feel angry, mad that they made him do this. He looks like a man who ought to be pitied. And yet in reality, all of us, Pilate, the soldiers, Simon, the crowd, the women, all of us, ourselves, we were really the ones who ought to be pitied. Everything Jesus was doing was out of his greater sympathy for you and me. Jesus was no stranger to sympathy. He was sympathetic throughout his entire earthly life, throughout his entire earthly ministry. He was sympathetic towards crowds, towards individuals, towards the sick, towards the grieving, towards the dying, towards those stuck in sin. They were like sheep without a shepherd, and he wanted to be their good shepherd. We rightly feel sympathetic towards Jesus. He's the innocent victim. But our sympathy towards him pales in comparison to the greater sympathy that he had for us. His sympathy led him to act. His perfect life was his sympathy in action. His painful trek to Golgotha was his sympathy in action. His crucifixion was his sympathy in action. The crucifixion displayed Christ's sympathy towards Pilate. Pilate, the man whose cowardice had allowed this injustice to happen. The man who put a sign above Jesus on the cross, making fun of the so-called King of the Jews. Jesus was sympathetic towards him, willing to take up the cross at his command. The crucifixion displayed Christ's sympathy towards the soldiers. The soldiers, the men who had tortured him with a crown of thorns and with a scourge. The men who dressed him up like a king and pretended to bow down to him in order to make fun of him. The men who literally nailed him to the cross. Jesus was sympathetic towards them, willing even to forgive them while they were crucifying him. The crucifixion displayed Christ's sympathy towards Simon. Simon, the man who carried the cross out of compulsion, not out of zeal to help out his Savior. The man who would have rather have been anywhere else than carrying the cross for a condemned man. Jesus was sympathetic towards him, willing to die on the cross that Simon carried to Golgotha on his behalf. The crucifixion displayed Christ's sympathy towards the women. The women, the ones who wept and wailed and lamented as if Jesus would die and remain dead, just like anyone else. The ones who had no idea that Jesus was doing all of that for them. Jesus was sympathetic towards them, willing to stop and to attend to their tears. The crucifixion displayed Christ's sympathy towards us. Us, the ones whose sympathy is often nothing more than just kind words and thoughts. Us, the ones who maybe say they forgive their offenders, but deep down in their hearts really don't. Us, the ones who know why Jesus did this, and yet still fail to live as those who have been crucified with him in faith. Jesus was sympathetic towards us, willing to endure all of that so that we could be with him forever. When we focus on Jesus' passion during Lent, the point isn't to feel sorry for Jesus. There's nothing wrong with being sad as we focus on his suffering. However, there's something greater. The point is to realize the greater sympathy that Jesus was showing us. He endured the cross. He endured the torment of hell so that we wouldn't have to. Love was behind this sympathy. An amazing love. An unfathomable love. A love for the loveless. A love for those who offered him nothing. A love that broke off the chains of sin and death. A love that won for us God's free and full forgiveness. A love that culminated in the most amazing act of sympathy ever done for anybody. Amen.